Violent, angry demonstrations. Cruelty to animals. We simply can't bear the idea of animals suffering. And of course we're right. There's no argument if the animal's a pet, even if the animals are on a farm. But what about medical experiments? Have humans the right to experiment on animals in order to protect ourselves from suffering or illness or disability? Now, Louise, you have strong views about this. What is your view?
In 1986, August 1986, my son Daniel was born. He was premature, and it was apparent when he was born that he had a heart defect. In 1989, he died after having a heart attack. The cardiac problem that my son had is investigated through medical research. And my argument is, where I don't believe in cosmetic use for animals, I can't say I'm an animal lover, but no cruelty should be shown to animals. If you have the life of a child who is desperately ill and suffering, and you have the life of an animal who can aid and help the disease that my son had, there is no comparison to saving the life of a child and that of saving the life of an animal.
And you believe it's only through experiments on animals that other children, like your son, will be saved from the tragedy that you and he suffered?
My son couldn't be saved because the medical research hadn't gained enough knowledge in the disease that he had. But without the medical research, if I was to have a child in 2 or 3 years' time and they had gained nothing, without the opportunity and the insight, children like mine might as well be put down at birth because there is no hope. And people who stop the research, they are stopping the lives of children who are suffering.
So it's the lives of children as against the lives of animals. Sir?
I disagree, and I think Louise is simply going along with what she's always been told, that animal research is necessary. I belong to a group of people who have investigated the research into their own illnesses.
What illness do you have?
In my case, I was hit by a car, had a bad blow on the head, and I get depression, and I've got crippling osteoarthritis. And we've found that the money spent on animal experiments is simply a waste of time. We will get proper research. If we abolish these experiments, we will get proper research which will find cures better.
Well, wait a minute. Let me ask Professor Martin, because you're involved in medical research. Tell us what kind of research you do.
As a doctor, I look after young men and middle-aged men who die of heart attacks. And when I look at the heart of the man after death at post-mortem, I get no idea of what caused that heart attack. I can see certain cells are involved, but I don't know what happened to them. And I know from very good evidence from the American Army in Vietnam, for example, that young soldiers dying age 20 already have the seeds of the disease there. And if I'm going to prevent that heart attack occurring, I know that it's associated with smoking, with cholesterol, with lifestyle, but even when I decrease those in a population, as in Finland, still heart attack is the commonest cause of death in European population.
Do you perform experiments on animals?
Yes.
You do?
I do. Let me tell you exactly what I do. In order to find out what happens to the young man's arteries as they get older, causing heart attack, I expose rabbits, for example, or rats, to a high cholesterol diet, and I see what happens to their arteries over the same time course. Now, I've tried to use computers. I do that. I've tried to use cell culture. I've done epidemiology. But I can promise you that those animals tell me an awful lot about what happens to men.
Madam, I'm just coming up, yes?
Why haven't you got any further when you're killing so many animals and putting them to all this stress and strain? How is it you've got no further? And it's the same with cancer research. They've got no further, and they're torturing all these animals every year.
I object to saying that I torture animals. I do these experiments under...
Oh, let him answer it.
I do these experiments under very strict government regulations with a Home Office inspector watching me.
Home Office
now,
visits these places once a year if you're
now
lucky.
Look,
and when they go there, You've got a case of like Professor Felberg. He's incontinent. He can hardly see what he's doing. He was allowed to carry on experimenting at 80-odd years old.
Do you know when the inspectors are coming? Do they just...
No, I don't know. But I'd like to tell you where we made progress very rapidly last year and probably saved children's lives through animal experimentation. May I tell that?
Please,
Esther?
yes.
We were looking at the hearts of rats to see how a gas called nitric oxide might make them not function properly.
You had to kill the rats, presumably, in
Yes.
order to examine their hearts. And what lesson did you learn from it?
We learnt that the rat heart was like a human uterus because they're both muscles with a hole in the middle.
Did this mean
and
that you
they both
could
contract.
save babies?
And this meant that the thoughts that gave us, the experimental evidence that gave us, allowed us to go to the obstetric unit in the same hospital and stop women having premature birth by stopping the uterus contract, just like we saw the rat heart stop contracting.
So you saved babies' lives that way.
We
Now,
saved
isn't
babies'
that worth
lives,
it?
yes.
You might have tried it out on rats, but ultimately you've got to try it out on people. Because
Of
what you
course.
use rats for doesn't...
Of course,
It's not relevant.
obviously.
So why-
It has to be tested on people eventually.
Absolutely, I agree
So
with you entirely.
why test on rats? It's irrelevant.
Because I could not have taken out human hearts and looked at the effect of the gas on the heart. The rat heart is very like the human heart, and I can learn very good lessons from it.
I don't accept that.
Right, hold on. Coming. Yes, yes. Wait a minute, sir.
Yes, I'd like to say that vivisection is a complete fraud. It's based on a methodological error. There are people who are earning a very comfortable living out of vivisection. It is based on a fraud, or it constitutes a fraud, because you cannot extrapolate from an animal body to a human body. There are so many imponderables. All you need is one amino acid difference in a protein, and it will completely throw your experiment. And there are thousands of amino acid differences between animal species and the human being.
So
there is no guarantee.
So you
that-
didn't hear? You didn't listen to what the professor said?
I did listen. He has no guarantee that what he finds in a rat will be applicable to man.
But it is highly likely.
That is not good enough. Likely is not science.
It is good
Likely
enough.
not
It is.
science.
I've got a rare genetic disorder of central nervous system, and I formed a patients group to defend medical research that uses animals, because that research is my only hope. Without it, I just will be dead. And that's the sort of reply I get. It's a birthday card
Sent to you,
on my birthday.
and it says, "Goodbye from all of us. The rat race won't be the same without you. Have a good funeral."
Yeah.
So is this from somebody who disapproves of your
Animal right, yes. I
Yes?
get many pieces like that.
Do you
and-
actually like animals?
I do, I very much do. I've got pets of my own. What I would like to make clear is that no one supports cruelty. What we're talking about at the end of the day is people or animals.
Yes.
Now, Esther, there are some people in here, I dare say, who would rather save the life of a mouse than a man. That is perfectly fair enough. I have nothing to say to those people except good luck. But I am sorry. I think I am worth more than the mouse. I think. What I'd like to say to all these people that think it's so easy to do research with their animals is simply that my disease is of the central nervous system, and you cannot grow the central nervous system in a test tube. So what would they use for a central nervous system?
Can you answer that, sir? If you were going to research into a treatment that might help Andrew, who has
Yes.
this disease, Friedreich's ataxia, how would you research it?
Yes, everyone feels great sympathy for Andrew, of course, and we don't want research to stop. But if you have a research method which is totally unreliable, you're not going to advance your cause or other sickening people's cause at all. The fact is that many people are sick because of drugs which have been tested on animals, declared safe, pushed onto the market, and then damaged. It may well be that you are damaged, unfortunately, because of drugs taken by your parents. One doesn't know.
I was not. I've never had a drug in my life.
Sir,
I'm a GP for 30-odd years, and when I entered general practice, I remember Churchill's words when he said, "Give us the tools and we'll finish the job." I went into practice and I found I had about perhaps 20% of the tools I required to cope with the serious disease with which I was faced. I now have something like 70 to 75% of the tools I need, and I know jolly well that the tools are being given to me as a result of animal research and nothing but.
I want you now to meet Terry Hill, because Terry Hill, you've actually seen what goes on in some laboratories. Tell us what you discovered.
I did work in a laboratory for some months, mainly working in the primate laboratory.
Those are monkeys.
Monkeys, yes. Not chimpanzees,
No.
they're apes, but I worked with small long-tailed macaques, crab-eating macaques. And I saw animals being experimented on. They would be laid down, fully conscious. They would be given an anticoagulant to stop the blood from clotting. They would have incisions made into them.
Without anaesthetic?
Without anaesthetic. On this particular experiment, the chap who was doing it didn't even have a license. The inspector came in, gave him a slap on the wrist, told him not to do it again.
So he was inspected, and they did find that he'd been doing these illegal operations.
Only after much of a fuss, and it was reported to the Home Office.
So what do you Yes, Professor?
I'd just like to comment on that. Cruelty to animals is inadmissible in any situation. And in this country, we have very strict rules, the strictest in the world, that govern animal experimentation.
Total rubbish.
And if anybody finds anybody doing illegal experiments or cruel experiments, they should report them to the Home Office immediately.
Can I just go on? In this particular experiment, it was using 2 primates.
Yes.
After 3 hours, it was found that primate number 1, which first came into the laboratory, was acting suspiciously. It wasn't struggling as it normally would or screaming, and it laid voluntarily back on its back while the technicians held it down. And it was discovered after the vet came in. The vet told the people in the laboratory not to carry on with the experiment because you'd be asking for trouble to carry out this particular procedure, making incisions, giving anticoagulant at the same time. After 3 hours, it was discovered that this animal had so much blood in its abdomen cavity, it was hemorrhaging so much that it had to be destroyed. The company asked for that experiment to be repeated, using the same monkey which survived, but replacing the dead one with another monkey, but to carry on with the experiment. But what I would like to add is that I see no difference from a man without a license making incisions into a living, breathing, sentient animal such as this primate, and somebody being given a license to carry out the same abuse. I see no difference.
So, can I just
it's legalised torture.
So you're saying if the monkey had been anaesthetised...
It hadn't been anaesthetised.
Right, what can we do to stop offences like that?
I can comment on the experiments I do and those of my colleagues I know. I think that I'm not making money out of it, somebody suggested. I'm doing it to try and relieve human suffering. And I'm concerned about the suffering of the animals I work with as I'm concerned about the suffering of my patients.
Hold on one moment. There's some people here who want to speak. Yes.
Esther, I mean, we hear all this pseudoscience all the time from the animal rights extremists, and it's really quite clear. I'll show you what keeps me alive. That's what keeps me alive, and that came from animal experiments. There are 10 million others like me. That's the only reason I'm here. Now,
can you explain what that is?
Yeah, that's a syringe I have to inject myself 4 or 5 times a day with synthetic insulin in order to stay alive.
Because you have diabetes?
Yes, that's right.
Can you tell us, does it really depend on animal experiments? Is that why you are alive, why you can use this?
I'm here to defend medical research. Some of that involves the use of animals. Some of it doesn't. But it's an essential part. There isn't another option. They can never come up with another option. The argument they always give is one of this vast amount of money that people are making out of it. I heard a figure. It costs, let's say, £120 million to develop a new drug. If you cut the use of animals and use a computer, slash that by 80%. So if the drug companies are so money greedy, why on earth aren't they using computer models? Because they don't work, that's why.
Right, let me ask you, yes, madam.
I'd like to make a
point. It's all very well saying that people make a lot of money. My little girl has cystic fibrosis. Most of the money for research into cystic fibrosis comes from charity, from people's pockets. And this research is so vital. She will basically die if they don't find a cure. It is still an incurable disease. At the moment, she has to have over 80 medicine capsules a day. She has to have physiotherapy twice a day. She takes inhalers. That is not a normal life. Now, I believe, the same as Louise, that she deserves to have the chance for a normal life and to live the sort of life expectancy that everybody else has. And I don't think anybody, however much you love animals, and I love animals, I don't think you have the right to take away anybody's hope, and certainly a child's hope.
Right, tell me what you think, Laura.
Well, if it comes to staying alive or medical research, then I agree if it's happened.
How do you feel about animals yourself?
Well, I used to have 2 hamsters myself, and we got 2 dogs and 2 cats.
So you like animals a lot?
Yes.
But
when it comes to staying alive, there is only one hope.
And that's via these experiments and these tests using them, yes. Yes.
I think something that's been missing from this debate so far is the fact that animal research is not the only hope for people. And a great deal of heart research, as Professor Martin was talking about, does not rely on rats and rabbits. My organisation is funding heart disease research now. It's using human tissue. It's finding out about the human disease. It's studying the basis of atherosclerosis.
But isn't it a fact that in order to test the safety of drugs, you really have to test them on animals, don't you?
From the point of view of developing alternatives to animal testing, I can't say we have all the alternatives. There's an ethical argument and there's a scientific argument.
So at the moment, there isn't a real medical alternative.
We can't substitute a cell culture for an animal test. But let's not forget that there is a lot of truth to what several people have said here, and that is that drugs tested on animals do not reliably work in humans. And I want to give you 2 examples of that. 22 drugs have been developed for spinal cord injury treatment on animal models, and none of them have worked in humans. And 25 drugs have been tested for stroke, and none of those worked in humans either. And for too long, laboratory scientists have been happy to use animals as off-the-shelf commodities, as black boxes. You put something in one end and you get a result out the other end. If you understand the process of health and disease, you break it down into its mechanisms, and you can study those not just in cell cultures but in slices of human tissue. You can study them by computer modelling, and it does work. You can study the living human volunteer, and that is increasingly being done with some fantastic new technical scanners.
I use all those techniques. I use human volunteers. I have a computer model.
So we don't need to go straight from cell cultures to humans.
What I'm saying is animal research is not the only way, but it is a small but necessary part of the whole fight against human disease.
Yes, Jeff.
I think it's quite interesting, actually, hearing one doctor contradicting another doctor. I'm not a scientist. I'm an ordinary member of the public. I happen to be blind. I have a disease that has no animal model, retinitis pigmentosa. They don't understand the mechanism. I was registered as blind in 1975, and everybody will be amazed to learn that no doctor, no sight researcher, no specialist has had the imagination to speak to me, to examine me, to ask me if I would care to be a free volunteer to help them with their work. Now, I think that's a wasted resource. Now, if you imagine that there are so many disabled people who disagree with your contributor, Andrew Blake, that we feel that animals are an unnecessary side street, and they actually confuse the issue.
How would you feel? How would you feel about research that was done into your condition but done on animals? Would you want that to happen?
I don't think it's good science. I really don't think it's going to benefit. They've been looking into my condition. My condition's existed possibly as long as people have, and they still don't understand the mechanism.
Well, we have got a doctor here who specialises in eye disease, as I understand it. Tell me, does your work involve experiments with animals?
Yes, not on this particular condition, but on different forms of blindness. I should say it's very generous of this gentleman to offer to volunteer, and it's very important that patients with disease should participate in experiments. Every possible form of treatment that we have available for every condition, I think it's fair to say, has involved at some point in its development the use of animals.
What do you
The use of animals has provided us with our fundamental understanding of how the body works, but it must fit in relation to other approaches to the problem. The law requires that animals cannot be used where there is an alternative approach available. It would be illegal to do so. But animal research, when it's essential, and the number of animals used in research is constantly declining, I'm very glad to say, but when it's essential, it takes its place amongst the spectrum of other approaches available to doctors and scientists
now
to approach the problem of disease.
You're glad to say the number of animals used in research
Absolutely.
is reducing, but you yourself do use them.
For some of my work, yes.
And what do you have to do to them?
I'm interested in how the visual parts of the brain work, and particularly how they develop in young children. I study young children. I also study young cats and young monkeys. Because it would be the normal experimental procedure that's involved. Yes, I'm trying to, if you let me.
He is going to tell us what he does, yes.
Normal kind of normal experiment that involves animals, because not all of my work does, would involve anesthetizing the animal, previously untouched and unharmed in any way, anesthetizing the animal, recording from nerve cells in its brain while it's continuously anesthetized, and there's no way of doing that in a person or a child, in order to discover how the visual parts of the brain work. At the end of such an experiment, the animal is killed without recovery, and sections are made of the brain to find out where the electrode has gone. Now, I'm very sorry that involves the death of an animal, but I know that it doesn't involve the suffering of an animal. Now, there's an important debate here, and I'm very glad that the people are here discussing it, but that debate is not advanced by sending bombs to people, like the bomb that was sent to my home, for instance, that could have killed my children if it was opened. I'm sure I hope that we can all agree on that.
What else has happened to you as a result of your operations?
The major progress is that in many parts of this country and in the United States and France, there are now screening programs to look at young babies, not kittens or monkeys. The work has moved on from that, to look at young babies to see whether the conditions are present early in life that we now know from the animal work will cause this condition.
So you believe you will save sight through these
absolutely,
experiments?
and the kind of condition that I work on involves 3% of the population. It's 1 in 30 children who develop this form of partial blindness.
Well, let me ask, who thinks that it's still not worth it? Do you think it's still not worth it, madam?
Bernard Shaw said that he who vivisects does not hesitate to lie about it. He sews up the eyelids of kittens. Did he say that? He didn't tell people that. He actually takes tiny kittens and takes away their eyesight. I don't think that's justifiable. We're all animals. We all suffer pain. We all suffer fear. We all have the right to live. We have the power to experiment on something that's weaker than ourselves or something that we think is inferior, as they did in Nazi Germany. But we don't have the right. And there are other, more dependable, other ways of medical research that do not depend on the torture of living creatures. That is immoral. That is not acceptable.
Now, quite clearly, it's this kind of very strong feeling that motivates some of the violent demonstrations in this country on behalf of the safety of animals. Nancy Phipps, more than 1,000 people went to the funeral of your daughter Jill in Coventry after she was crushed by the wheels of a lorry carrying veal cars for export. You were actually there at that demonstration yourself when she died. Did she feel as strongly about medical experiments?
She did. She felt strongly about all cruelty to animals. As a family, we all care deeply. We've campaigned for 11 years, and Jill's death it's a sacrifice I wouldn't have given. But having said that, we are not going to stop fighting for against the cruelty to animals. And if these places of where the vivisectors are, if they're so marvellous, why don't they open the doors and let us all see them?
Right, now Zach, you're Jill's brother. You demonstrate, don't you, against cruelty to animals. Do you use violent means?
Personally, no. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm a very non-violent kind of person. But can I say, Esther, there are wider issues at stake here. I feel that as a society, we must not start justifying violence, whether it's to animals or people. We must say no to violence all the way down the line, whatever the reason behind it. That includes torturing animals. That includes the whole area of
Right, let's take you through that. That includes torture of animals. Does it include sending bombs to doctors?
I wouldn't dream of sending a bomb to a doctor personally.
Does that include calling doctors torturers like the Nazis?
Well, I think if they are torturers, then we should be able to speak truthfully. For instance, Mr. Blakemore there, he's been torturing animals for 20 years and he still hasn't done what he said he was going to do.
Would you really equate him with a Nazi when he's explained to you that his purpose is to save the sight of babies?
Well, that's just talk, isn't it? He says that's to save talk. The truth is he's been on torturing animals 20-odd years and he still hasn't done anything, Esther. It's all just talk.
But he says he has. He says he's discovered things which may well save the sight of babies.
May well, but he hasn't. He hasn't saved the sight of babies. He's just destroyed thousands upon thousands of animals. He's well known.
Right, hold on a minute. This gentleman's had his hand up for ages.
I think what people should be aware of is since we have started testing drugs on animals, more people than ever before are dying. Human disease has actually gone up astronomically since we started testing drugs on animals. It's been calculated that animal-tested drugs are now killing the same number of people who are dying on the roads every year. Now, if animal research is so reliable, if animal research is so safe, how on earth can there have been so many animal disasters from these drugs?
Right, madam?
I'd like to say we haven't actually gone back to the issue of the animals, how they are treated when they are there. This doctor said he didn't once mention harming the kitten's eyelids without them being under anaesthetic. He didn't say he tortures them, and I don't believe he does. There are many places that do, and I think there should be far greater restrictions on those and a lot more effort put into finding them out. I love animals, I love cats, but I'm sure any of these people who are saying we shouldn't do it, if they were faced with their own child or mother and the choice of their pet, they would give up their pet.
So what we're really saying is it's very important to make sure that the way these tests are conducted is within the law and doesn't cause suffering. Yes, sir.
Well, I think we have to bring it back into the real world, really. Like Colin Blakemore, I've just finished an investigation how an 8-year-old daughter has been threatened with death by people who I consider to abuse animals. She received a telephone call from an irate, it wasn't a scientist, it was an irate farmer, because I went round with a hidden camera and filmed animals being abused. And these animals were severely beaten across the face and head, and as a result, one of them has been prosecuted, and there's another few coming up for this prosecution. And he rang up my 8-year-old daughter and said that he would get me first, then her, and then my wife. Now, we all have that sort of thing, and we all condemn it. The scientists must clean their act together, because unlike what the professor says, please, there are problems in laboratories. Clearly, the law is inefficient. The enforcement of the law is the problem.
So you're arguing in favour of properly regulated testing?
Yes, but what we need to do is for the likes of Colin Blakemore and other people within the welfare organisations, the scientific community, to get together and make sure the laboratory is the place where we want to see research. If we grant the scientists the hope, who's going to deny the lady whose daughter has cystic fibrosis? Who's going to deny Andrew? Who's going to deny these people? No one surely can. But there's an awful lot of animal research we need to get rid of, and the only way to do it, I believe, is for us all to come together and discuss it properly, get rid of this rubbish research, and make these laboratories places that we all know what goes on within them.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. I'd like to thank everyone here for sharing their views, very strongly held views. As you've heard, I'm sure there'll be great debates at home. Until next time, from all of us here, goodbye.
And